the natural, maturing power of reason. So we have the completely reasonable person, the classic archetypal fraternal image of the wise man. We have this wise man as the kindly grandfather, the man who belongs to the long-livers, who has lived long and well, who has passed through all the moods and intranquilities of existence and come finally to a gentle and safe harbor, where he is at rest with life and with people and with things, with himself and with God. This type of peace arising from the full use of faculty rather than the denial of it. This peace which is knowledge carried on until it becomes a living value in our daily experience. This, in a way, sets the situation for the theurgical achievement. Well, just as surely as in the Eastern religion, it was necessary to renounce the unreal in order to attain reality, so in the Greek and classical systems, man had to penetrate the unreal by the instruments of philosophy, to discover the true world that lay behind the appearances of things. And most of all, to discover this true world to be a natural marvel of beauty and truth. And in this discovery, gaining a complete confidence in the wisdom and benevolence of eternal providence. Having attained such levels, as Plotinus points out, the wise man ceases all unreasonable attitude. He knows too well the structure of human beings to criticize or condemn. He knows too well the workings of human nature to be confused or deceived by it. He accepts things as they are. He realizes the inevitability of existing conditions. He moves through existing relationships with a full understanding of their bearing upon eternal facts. And he expects this world to be a place of instruction, not a place of gratification. Having thus renounced false values by the aid of philosophic discipline, he is able to reach out to embrace true values. And in this degree, he begins his experience of the philosophic life. He becomes the person who is unmoved by the non-tranquilities of passing occasions, conditions. And dwelling as he does always in a deep internal relaxation, he has at all times the full availability of his faculties. Having no false opinions, he will not deceive himself. Having no unreasonable ambitions, he will not be deceived by others. Expecting no more than is due, he will have no false hopes. Perfectly willing to accept that which is his proper responsibility, he will have no false fears. And as the Bhagavad Gita says in India, unmoved in pain and pleasure, this one is fitted for immortality. Philosophy then, by tempering away all of the intemperances of existence, brings the person finally to a happy, amicable relationship with truth, fact, and reality. It is obvious, of course, that all philosophic systems do not inevitably confer such blessings. For these systems may be in conflict with each other. The teachings which they disseminate may be contradictory. Most philosophic systems, especially those of the modern world, were not founded upon a solid insight, but rather upon a scientific analysis of previous opinion. And the philosophy was simply another kind of science, groping from one kind of intellectual fact to another. The great philosopher was the brilliant thinker who could unseat some previous opinion and put his own in its place. There was no problem of true greatness of character. As a result, we have had a great many schools of thought, some very brilliant, some very difficult to refute, some pathetic in their inability to confer the slightest consolation upon the human heart, some utterly devoid of idealism, some captured in the most abject melancholy, some fearing the worst, some hoping the worst, but very few with any substance by which man could solve the immediate needs of his day. As a result of this sterility in modern philosophy, it has made practically no contribution to the advancement of society or the preservation of human values. It has, if anything, joined with other bitter and limited perspectives to undermine what ideals and principles the human race had been able to preserve. It is true of this as of aesthetics, that philosophy which does no good must almost certainly do harm. That which gives man no greater nobility takes something away from that which he already has. And to train the young in ideas and attitudes made illustrious by great names, but calculated to destroy the inner value of these young people, to take from them faith in humanity, faith in nature, faith in God, faith in truth, to thus deprive the student of these needed elements of his own maturity is to deform him rather than to advance his culture. There is no great beauty in disillusion, nor is there any use in taking the attitude that we might as well know the worst now as later. If we were not so anxious to know the worst now, we might be able to build a much stronger foundation so that in the future things would be better and not worse. Theurgy is the transforming power of enlightened wisdom. It is the rich, warm quality of friendliness. The word philosophy means friendliness for truth. The philosopher is the friend of truth. He wishes to be a good friend. He wishes to have the deep fraternal relationship with those principles which are enduring. Friends are kindly people, interested more in the good of their friend than in the good of themselves. And in philosophy, the true philosopher is interested in the spreading and sharing of philosophic insight, rather than merely the winning of an argument or the establishment of himself as an authority on some particular school or some previous intellectual. In the Eastern world, we have some interesting thoughts about this. The responsibility of philosophy is always the responsibility of the teacher. The teacher-student relationship is almost inevitable. In the East, the student-teacher relationship is finally summarized in the concept of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the exalted soul in Buddhism that has renounced the attainment of the Paranirvana to return and instruct those who have not yet been emancipated from illusion. So the Bodhisattva becomes the teacher, the savior, the liberator, the enlightener. In all Buddhist literature, this point is clearly brought out, that even the Bodhisattva has to be extremely careful, lest his efforts to serve others will swing back upon himself and cause him to strengthen the illusion of his own importance. If any individual believes that he becomes the instructor of others, he must also, to a measure, believe that he is valuable. That it is but a very little way between this recognition of self-value and a hopeless spiritual arrogance. And individuals who claim to be devoting their lives to the service of other people are actually profoundly enjoying the fact that they are able to influence other lives. Philosophy is not sound. Therefore, in philosophy, it is very important always to realize that we are the servants of something greater than ourselves, that our own satisfaction is not important. But the real important thing is that we are able in one way or another to share or communicate a condition of natural existence, which may be properly termed the philosophic life. If through our own conduct we are able to demonstrate that we have complete victory over the intemperances of our own natures, then in this way we become solid instructors of others. If, however, ignoring the innumerable imperfections of our own characters, we hasten out to save others, it may be suspected that our motives are not entirely adequate. So in philosophy, the philosophic life has to be lived from the beginning to the end. Each step has to be taken with the patience, forbearance, and insight that truly wise. And in the Neoplatonic system, following very largely the Platonic disciplines and the Pythagorean disciplines, a way was set out by means of which the philosopher could gradually recognize the developments of his own character. Philosophy began with a decision which only time could mature. A decision that was essentially a dedication. And whether the individual really recognized the value of his own decision at the time he made it, it's hard to say. But he lived in an age, at a time, when this decision was of value. But it was the decision of the noblest of his own people. And it was the decision of those whom he most respected, most admired. He had to formally and without equivocation or reservation within himself dedicate his own nature to the philosophic life. He had to assume within himself that from that time on his life belonged to truth rather than to his own nature. That his entire career must have as its primary objective the purification of his own nature. This did not mean that he had to reject all relationships with the common problems of living. But it did mean that he could no longer drift away or wander away into the bypaths which led to the forgetfulness of his primary purpose. From the time of this basic obligation, he changed the general perspective of his life. He realized that he lived in order to grow, that growth, unfoldment, revelation of the divine purpose through his own nature. This large concept must guide him and regulate his conduct. He lived truly, perhaps, in the biblical thought, not my will, but thine be done. He lived no longer just to do as he pleased, but to do that which was necessary in order that the divine plan should be advanced by his effort. He became a truth seeker. He became a truth server. And only by these dedications could he ever ultimately attain the goal which all men are seeking. He already assumed truth to be the most precious thing in the world, more valuable than any opinion, more important than any feud which he might like to carry on, superior to any intemperance or intolerance of attitude which was peculiar to his own nature, infinitely superior to wealth, power, or the satisfaction of any worldly cause. That his allegiance to truth came before his allegiance to anything else that existed. But fortunately, his allegiance to truth did not in any way interfere with his allegiance to any other just thing. It merely meant that he no longer bestowed any of his energy or any of his life upon inferior causes or destructive situations. He learned that the only way in which he could live for truth alone was to become indifferent as to his own life. Indifferent as to whether he lived or died, concerned only with the basic problem of living well and dying well. It was no longer important to him whether he was recognized by others, applauded, or rewarded in any way. He was seeking that which is the ultimate reward. He was seeking the greatest treasure in the world. Therefore, he must give to this quest all the greatness of himself. By degrees, he recognized and integrated his life around a very important force. But it was without any of the sense of spiritual ambition, which we also have to guard against. There are many people who have selfishly departed from all the responsibilities of life, simply to find their own way to some paradisical sphere to come, with no thought for anything except their own happiness and their own convenience. This is not the point at all. If it is attempted in this way, failure is inevitable. What the wise person is attempting to do is to gain a complete relaxation within the very essence or substance of the divine purpose itself. To become completely dedicated and at the same time strangely purposeless. To have a goal that is inevitable and yet never to fight or struggle for that goal, realizing always that the great attainment is by a complete release of the individual from his own purposes or his own ambitions. Always the distinct and the definite determination to remain accepted, to take into himself that which was for him, to fulfill that which was required of him, to fail in nothing, but to have no purpose apart from the divine purpose, so that truly he was God's man, that he served as a proper liege man to that which was eternal truth itself. From this type of dedication, we find the gradual relaxing of the intellect away from most of the complexities with which we associate even philosophy. There is a philosophy which transcends itself. There is a philosophy that is so indescribably simple that words cannot be found that are small enough to define it. There is a philosophy so immediate that it is captured in an instant. There is a wisdom that breaks away entirely from the infinite formalities of definition and description, that has never been held or captured within a syllogism, which has never at any time been subjected to a classification into categories. There is simply this eternal, absolute reasonableness of things. It is so mysterious that it is experienced before it is understood, that it is known before it can be defined. And having understood it and defined it, there is no longer any need to describe it, or to contemplate, or to justify the processes which it indicates. For all philosophy ends in certainty. And certainties are things which arise in the experience of consciousness which cannot be refuted. When man is faced with a certainty, there is a voice within him that says, this is certain. This cannot be changed. This is inevitable, immutable, immovable. These certainties come gradually to the individual. But they certainly arise when he transcends the common processes of the mind. The Neoplatonists were perfectly in harmony with Buddha in realizing that the mind is a wonderful servant, but a heartless taskmaster. That in some mysterious way it was the duty of the mind finally to transcend itself. It was the duty of the mind to give way to a faculty superior to reason. The mind provided a ladder, the so-called escalade de la sage, the ladder of the sages. Up this ladder, which was also Bacon's mysterious pyramid of paths, up this ladder the mind descends, rung by rung, step by step, until it reaches the highest part of the ladder. And here definitions fail. Here all things which arise in the mind become inadequate. Here all systems, as we know them, are transcended and appear somewhat ridiculous. Here man suddenly discovers the meaninglessness of his own speculations and wonders how he might, in his infantile mind, have been so plagued with the doubts and policies which seem so important to him in his daily life. There comes, of course, this point, therefore, in which the mind comes to the extremity of itself, when it can no longer cope with the mystery of reality. Our way of thinking always is the same. It is quantitative, not quality. Our idea of reality as we send our astronauts out into space is the gradual conquest of an infinite number of stars. Our idea of going out, going forth, going toward the infinite is to approach an infinite diversity, a transcendent, incalculable infinitude of forms and beings and powers and images and qualities. Every discovery that we make seems to indicate that there is more that we must know than we have ever suspected, and that therefore we must continually meet this challenge by the infinite development of faculties and propensities and powers, mechanisms, methods, and means. In other words, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, according to the classic thinking, this vast increase in the phenomenal aspect of this is an illusion. There is not a constant increase of knowledge. There is not a universe that is growing bigger every moment. The fact of the matter really is that man, in his effort to grasp the universe, in his effort to understand, in his effort to arrive at a conscious relationship with life, must continually simplify. He must find that when he understands one principle, he destroys 10 million complexities. But when he discovers one law, he wipes out a cosmos of apparent accidents, circumstances, and mysteries that appear incomprehensible to him. As he goes further and further in his qualitative search for reality, reality becomes more and more simple. Its manifestations may be infinite, but its substance is extremely simple. We have the same mysterious experience with life itself. Man is a creature of many and complex attributes and qualities. Yet within each of us is something that makes us alive here and now. And that is a little spark. We actually know nothing about this spark. We know that it can stand tremendous stress, that it may survive accidents and conditions which appear to be beyond the power of man to survive. And yet we know that this little spark may go out in sleep for no reason that we have any understanding of. That it can be blown out like the flame of a candle in an instant. Or it may struggle against the limitations of the flesh for 80 years. We know not what this thing is, but it is life. And it is one thing. And it is utter simplicity because it is utter life. And yet it sustains upon itself and by itself and within itself all the functions of the human body. So somewhere in space is reality. An absolutely simple flame. A tremendous thing that can be experienced, perhaps most perfectly by a child. Most perfectly by someone who has never been deluded or confused by the extravagances of learning. So men going out to conquer time and space are always conquered by it, and leave their own bones somewhere on the shores of the infinite ocean. A conquest of the unknown is this strange, mysterious, simple inner experience by which alone man can arrive at certainty. An experience of a moment, a mystical insight, an instance of silence in space, a moment of absolute rapport between the being and the infinite, and the discovery that this rapport is not man as a humble creature bowing before a vast magnificence, but a strange reaching out of life to life with an absolute intimacy, with a fraternity, with the simplest relationship of parent to child, or the deep and wonderful value of two lovers. It is not this strange, formidable thing we are forever fighting. So philosophy, through theurgy, tries to give us this experience, this wisdom that is beyond wisdom. It tells us some way that we must finally outgrow our own intelligence, outgrow our own mind. We must go through the process of the mind until it discovers for itself its own futility. For until then it can never get over its own insufferable arrogance. But there comes a time when it becomes exhausted of its own ineffectiveness. All its speculations, all its strategies, all its conspiracies come to nothing. All its false knowledge and vain glory fail. And the individual who has mastered all the arts and sciences of the world feels in helpless tears beside the crib of his own dying child, unable to do anything whatever. Life, therefore, has to have another answer to all this. It has to have the tremendous answer of the immediacy of the availability of pure life, of pure reality, of pure truth, of pure insight. This is theurgy. This is this wonderful thing by which man penetrates not only the pretensions of others, but most of all his own pretensions. Suddenly discovering the true dimensions of his own wisdom and ignorance, and perceiving his true place in an eternal pattern of things. We have every reason to believe that in the advancing years of his life, Plato achieved this theurgic punching. We learn that as he grew older, his mind began to take less interest in the great profundities of thought which had once distinguished him. He was still the great philosopher, but through his greatness was coming a strange childlikeness. It was this gradual liberation from all desire for disputation and profound argument and for deep analysis and for vast interpretation that finally separated Aristotle from Plato. Aristotle wanted to go on systematizing knowledge. He wanted to know more and more. And Plato was gradually discovering that knowledge is a burden upon the spirit. And Plato drifted more and more into the mystics. I suppose some of his more analytical disciples were convinced that the great philosopher was entering his second childhood, that perhaps his mind was weakening with the years. But Plato did not have the kind of mind that weakened. He grew strangely strong. Plato reached the point where he no longer needed philosophy, as we think. What need has a man of philosophy who has lived it all his life? What needs the individual of reason who is by nature reasonable? How much can we require ethics if we are ethical by soul? If we are honorable in the spirit of our very transaction? Why do we have to study ethics? If everything that we think is filled with nobility and beauty, and we have cultivated the virtues as the simple adorations of principles, what need have we of ethics? Or what need have we of aesthetics? We are all these things already in ourselves. When by our own insight we have evaluated the mind in all its functions, when we know the true nature of our own thoughts, and can intuitively interpret the thoughts of others, what need have we of psychology? We cannot be neurotic. We cannot have these problems in ourselves, because into our own consciousness we have through the years built the perfect substance of our own belief. And we have linked our belief so closely to our consciousness that there is no conflict in the subconscious nature of ourselves. What need has such a person of philosophy? He cannot attain it because he already is it. He is an embodiment of it. He does not have to go to school to study that which is his own very nature and substance. But having attained all of this, having come to the strange and wonderful tranquility and prophetic genius of the Platonic mind, Plato began to demonstrate something else. There began to appear in his nature, what some of his disciples, particularly his nephew Theurgy, called the loneliness of an old man. Plato was lonely. He had all this knowledge, but somehow his eyes drifted to the sunset. There was nothing more that he needed to know. There was nothing more that wisdom could teach him. Perhaps he was too tired to learn arts and sciences which were as yet but partially structured in his own day. But everything that was essential to him he already possessed. Yet he lacked something. He lacked freedom. Freedom from his own existence. He lacked that complete freedom of the bird that flies out into the sky. Plato wanted to go home. Plato wanted to be one with this universe, which he already understood. He wanted to be free of these strange fetters and limitations which were the final dividers between the finite and the infinite. He wanted to mingle the common essence of his own soul with the eternal soul in space. He had loved God. He had loved truth. He had served both God and truth with a whole heart. Now he wanted to go home to God and truth. He wanted to be one with that which he had loved so long. There was no other need of wisdom. There was no other goal, no other purpose that was desirable. By his very nature, he went to sleep one night with the poems of Sophron for a pillow under his head. He did not wake again. He died as he had lived, in complete peace. So this peculiar and wonderful concept of a wise person quietly going home, without doubt, without fear, without any uncertainty, with no expectation of heavenly rest, no probability of infernal unrest, only the soul going home to the universe of realities, of beauties, of divinities, which it had rationally experienced. But it is one thing to speak of these things, to bring them up in the mind, to find the experience of intellect about them. It is one thing to know that God is there. Another thing to step across and be one with God. This was the goal. This was the mysterious end which the Alexandrian mystics sought to communicate in the concept of Theurgy. Theurgy was a taking of all of this wonderful intellectual mystery, simplifying it to its ultimate, and discovering in this ultimate simplicity the union with truth which all the complexities of the mind could not attain. There are so many arts and so many sciences, and if things continue as they are now, the young people of the future are going to have a very bad time of it. It already takes over 20 years of life to complete an education. If the present form of knowledge continues to increase, enrich as it is now, adding specialized knowledge of any kind, within the next 50 years, the average young person may not be able to graduate into a technical education before he is 40 years old. This means his life is 2/3 finished before he has been able to accumulate into his own mind the wisdom of his time, the skills, the scientific patterns, formulas, and precision which are necessary to the practice of an advanced art or science. As we go on, the time will continually increase. So man, perhaps in the conquest of the theories of knowledge, will never live to practice. This is not nature's intent. This is not the end. Theurgy would tell us that probably in a few years, 4 or 5 years at most, it might be possible for man to attain the substance. That as we progress, our periods of schooling should be less, not greater, because our own insight should be growing, grasping more of eternity constantly and requiring less of instruction. The individual today should be born with a knowledge that the past never possessed. Perhaps he is born with that knowledge, but until he is searched for it, until we give attention to this, and no longer assume that he is born in a state of virgin ignorance, and therefore must be indoctrinated from the cradle. Perhaps if we took a different approach, we would discover that maybe man does not know the prominent and dominating opinions of this generation, but deep within him is a knowledge of the eternal values of the infinite itself. That man who was born to outlive all generations must have a wisdom greater than generation. And this is possible, and this is true. The search for these verities were the very substances of the Neoplatonic philosophy. That sometime man would be able to adjust his consciousness again with the infinite mind, and in that adjustment discover all that was real and quietly reject all that is unreal, recognizing that reality to be the possession of such knowledge as contributes to man's eternity, makes him greater than the ages, brings him inevitably into the full citizenship in eternity. All other knowledge is passive, but the knowledge which transcends knowledge, which may be termed the knowledge of knowledge, the wisdom of wisdom, is that which is discovered by penetrating all systems to find in their heart a living fact. That this living fact cannot be analyzed, but it can be shared. It can be experienced. It can be conferred by intuition alone. It can be known because it is a fact. This knowledge can come instant, whereas the knowledge of the consequences of this fact might require ages to accumulate. So theurgy is this instantaneous availability of the infinite, based, however, upon man's dedication to the qualification of his own nature for the experience of truth to occur within himself. This then represents the application of philosophy, the final fulfillment of it, where it verges to mingle its courses with religion, where it becomes part of the great process of man's spiritual growth. Well, I think our time is up, folks, so I guess we'll have to call it evening. Now, I'd like to point out that this evening and next Wednesday evening, these being the last 2 evenings of our classes, our little gift shop will be open for those who might wish to look around. It will be open this evening and next Wednesday evening after the lecture as well as before. Also, the library is open with a new exhibit which we think you will find most interesting. And there are also some delightful art things there that you may enjoy seeing. We thank you and hope to see you again next week when we're going to take up one of the most interesting of the sections of our book, and that is the mysterious story of the 10 Bulls. This is the Zen fable of illumination. And I think it is one of the great classics of philosophic literature.
Thank you very much.